Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to walk you through how to complete the box model project. So first thing is to go ahead and pull up the assignment description. We have our example that we're trying to make ours look as close as possible to. And if I go down to procedure, I have my step-by-step that I should be following. So first thing is to go ahead and create your project folder, name it correctly, and have it ready to go to drag and drop into brackets. So out on my Finder, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. I'm on two screens, so sometimes I got to come out here and drag over. There we go. I'm going to name it correctly. And of course, this video might be made for multiple classes, so always follow what it tells you in the deliverables on D2L. So I'm going to go ahead and create this for a project 2. I would begin with my last name, first initial, and then 02. Then I want to drag and drop that into brackets. So I'm going to go ahead first and open brackets. Grab that whole project folder and drag and drop it into brackets. All right, let me just make that a little bit bigger so everyone can see it. And I'm ready to create my HTML file and my CSS file. So I'm going to do Command N. You could do File New. Then right away I'm going to go ahead and save it. So Command S or File Save. I need to open this window if I need to move and put it into somewhere else. However, I do have it in the correct folder, so I'm good to go. Just make sure that one's highlighted. I'm going to save this, as always, index.html. I've had students email me where this is where they're messing up. I tell you to name it this not because it's just for fun, but because as we're walking through and doing things together, if you name it something different, your links won't work if you then later follow what I'm doing exactly. Once you learn how to link and to make sure that what you're linking to is named exactly what you're coding, you can change it, although the index you never should. But just keep in mind, if you do change these names, that could be where you're messing up if things aren't, especially if you're finding that you're not able to link things together. So index.html in that project 2 folder and save. And I said we'll create our CSS, but let's follow exactly what the instructions say. So next it wants us to create the structure of our basic HTML web page. So I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because there is a video in the itinerary that does this exactly. So I'm just going to do it pretty quick. So over here, zoom in a bit so you can see my text a bit better. Doc type declaration. Then we add our skeleton, HTML. Inside the HTML, we'll always have our head and our body. Inside the head, we always want to add our title. So I'd go ahead and name this either Project 2 or any of these projects that you do, as long as what we're trying to learn is mimicked. You could do something else. So I don't need to use the exact same text that's in the example. I'm just trying to learn the box model. So here on my title, maybe I'm going to pull my text from something else. So I'm actually trying to create a web page. For example, let's do, this is desert landscapes. And I'm making this video from southern Utah, which we're in the desert. So I just looked out the window and that's where that came from. But just remember that title. You always want to add it in there. It looks very amateurish to forget to add a title. So next we'll go ahead into the body and let's jump back over and just make sure. So we added our title, and then we want to add our large structural elements. So header, main, and footer. All right, so I got my header. Main and my footer. And we have our basic HTML web page. So we can move on to creating our external style sheet, linking them together, and then testing to make sure that it works. So File New or Command N. Once you have your file, go ahead and save it, Command S or File Save. This we're going to name style.css. Again, name it style.css, all lowercase. Make sure it is in that project folder so that it is right next to our index.html. That is part of this project. Go back to our HTML and link them together. So that needs to be done in the head. Can be anywhere in the head. I like to go to the title and add it in after. So we have link space href equals quotation style.css. Make sure you go outside of that quotation, space. We need to add in our relationship, so rel equals quotation and style sheet. Again, you can also add in that third attribute of type, but you don't really need to. So I'm going to go ahead and end there. Then I want to test it. So I go back to my style.css, add in body for my selector, my element selector. Add my curly braces and then my property and value for background. And if you want a list of colors to choose from, you do want to make sure you're writing out the full property and not shorthanding into background. So I'm going to make sure to do background dash color. I get this list, choose anything that's not white so that you can just make sure that it's actually working. I'll go ahead and save that and preview. I see my color, I'm good to go. I know that my files are saved in the right spot, together in a project folder. I know that I've coded correctly and it's linking and everything's working. So if you do want to keep that color, go ahead and keep that color. At this point, most of the time when you're working on a project, you want your color theme. So I'm going to bounce back over to my browser and go to Adobe Color. I'm going to go to Explore. And I will find a color theme that I like. I'm going to type in desert, that goes with my theme. And I'm going to go with these here. So I'm going to click on it, and now I have some colors that I can paste over into my site. So for my background, I'm going to go ahead and do maybe this color here. So I'm going to copy that. And I'm, again, sorry, I'm probably jumping ahead of the assignment description. So we'll go ahead and add in this body color, but then we'll go back over. So background dash color for our property and paste in our value. Got to make sure to have that hash sign or else that hex value won't work. Okay, let's go back to our description. And we've seen the color. We're ready to add our HTML and CSS code needed to recreate that basic web page. Oh, sorry, I don't know what just happened there. Okay, so that kind of pinkish color that I have is going to be the brown in this example. And then I want to go ahead and add in a color for my header, my main, and my footer. So bounce back over here. And I'm choosing to do this because I'm thinking globally. I'm thinking of the overall structure first, then I'll get to the content a little bit later. All right, for my header, add in my background. Since I'm using hex value, I'm just gonna go background. Then I'll go over to my Adobe Color and grab something. I'm gonna go darker, so I'm gonna go copy. Add that in. Really quick, I wanna point out, a lot of you might be having issues because you're forgetting the semicolon, or you're making some other mistake in the syntax. So that is the first thing to look for. And unfortunately in your CSS file, when you make a mistake, it doesn't turn the code red all the time. So you really got to watch for those semicolons. All right, then we go to our main. And to make it faster, I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it because I know I'm going to be using the same property. And then I'll just go ahead and swap that out for the actual elements I want to target. And I'm going to keep my header and footer the same color like the example. That means just my main needs to change color. So I'm going to go back over, grab another color, paste that in. And if we take a look at our preview right now, I can see I don't see anything yet. And that is because the block level elements, which we've added, they get their width from their parent, but they get their height from their content. So let's go ahead and add in some width and height so we can see them. Most commonly is for the width to use a percentage and the height to begin with a fixed measurement, but then later as you add content, a lot of them they'll change to auto so that it can grow with that content. But if you just want to see it, you just want to go ahead and give it a size. So I'm going to start with my width at 100%, like the example, and I'll go ahead and add in a height. For the header, it looks pretty small, so I'm going to go 100 pixels. I know I want width and height, so I'm actually just going to go ahead and copy those and also add those into my main and my footer. The main, however, I'm going to go ahead and make the height bigger, maybe about 700 pixels for now. Again, I'll probably change that to a auto a little bit later. And my footer, I'm going to make that smaller than my header, so I'm going to go with 50 pixels. So right there, after I'd added my code, I didn't actually still see anything over my preview, and that might happen to you sometimes. So I jumped over and I refreshed the screen, and I now can see what I'm working on. To point out a couple of other things that might happen, if you see it isn't working, look and make sure you do not have a space between your measuring unit and your value. Okay, let's jump back over to our instructions and see what's next. Actually, we're just still following what we see here. So let's go ahead and add it in an H1 into our header. So I'm going to go over to my content. Here in the header, I can see I have an H1. I'm going to pull this over here for just a second so we can see it while we're still on our code. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and now add in all these different elements. I can see them, I know what they are, well, especially because the content is telling you what they are. So I'm just going to go ahead and add them in and then style them and add content and then style them. So I've added in my H1. Then I know that this is a heading 2 inside of a section element. So this down here is also a section element. I have 2 sections inside the main element. So here under main, I have 1 section. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. add in another section. So I'm thinking of these larger structural elements first. All right, I have 2 sections. Inside each section, I have 1, 2, 3 articles. So I'm going to go here inside this section. And actually, since I know I need 3 of them, I can use that trick we learned where I can place my cursor, and then as long as I have the space, I can hold Command and click again and click again. And now I have 3 cursors. I let go of Command, and I can type in all 3 articles at the same time. I could have done even all 6 articles, but I'm just going to go ahead and copy those 3, go back down to my second section, and paste those in. Okay, and now I can go back to this heading 2. So that heading 2 is inside the section element, but it is not inside the articles. So I want to make sure I'm placing it in the right spot. So here after section, but above article, I go ahead and add in an H2. Same thing on that second section, add in my H2. And then I do have an H3 above or inside each article. I can also see that there are 2 paragraphs inside each article. So let's add those. So here, I'm going to go ahead and place my cursor in the first article, hold Command, and place cursors in every single article, since I know I can see they have the same structure. So first, add in my H3. Oops. Make sure then I go outside of the H3, and I can hold Command and place the cursors again. And then I can add in 2 paragraphs. All right, I have gone in and cleaned up my code. If you would like to do the same, pause your video now and go in and make sure that yours looks like mine does. Just to recap what we have, inside the main element, we have 2 sections, 1 and 2. Each of those sections has an H2, 3 articles. Inside of each article, there is an H3 and 2 paragraphs. So now I can go ahead and start to add in some other styling elements. For example, I can see there is a solid border around each section, and that there is a dashed bottom border under the H2 in each section. Then there's a top and bottom thick border around each H3. So let's do those now. We'll start with the solid border around the sections. So over in the style.css, I don't have a section element yet, or excuse me, section selector, an element selector. We'll add in border, and I could do these separate like we learned, border bottom, border top, border all of that, but since I want this around all 4 sides, I'm going to shorthand it into just border. When I do that, I need the 3 properties. First, I need how big. I'm going to do a 1 pixel border, space. I want it solid, space, and then the color. I'm going to do black. Actually, let me go and grab a color from my theme. I'll do this brown color here. And I'll just pull up my preview just to make sure we can see. Okay. And this is something that we learned in the previous videos. I've added my border, but those sections have no content. So I can see those borders there, but they look a little odd since there isn't anything in them. So let's go ahead and add in some content so we can take a look. I'm going to get that from either a lorem ipsum generator, or if I want to, I can go pull content from the web. I can make up my own content. I can do whatever I want. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and use a generator. So new tab, lorem ipsum. Just going to grab this first one. And I want 2 paragraphs. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these 2. And I'm not actually using the generator. I'm just pulling from here. Let's go ahead and use a generator. So here I could do 2 paragraphs, generate. There we go. So I'm going to copy that, bounce back over to my HTML, and let's add those paragraphs into each of our paragraphs. So I'm going to, actually that lorem ipsum may have brought paragraph tags in. Let's go ahead and just check that really quick. So I paste, and it did not. So I need to move my tags. So let's go ahead and get this cleaned up. I take this opening paragraph tag and add it here. So I have that opening and closing around, whoops. We need to move these as well. So let's go ahead and grab that one, put it here, and grab that closing. Sorry, I hit a keyboard and split my screen. There we go. I'm also going to go ahead and tab those paragraphs over one more, just to kind of clean that up a bit. Okay, I have those 2 paragraphs. I'm going to make my life easier since I'm just using lorem ipsum. I'm just going to go ahead and copy those and replace those in each place that I have these paragraphs. And I'm probably adding in more content than I have in my example, but that's fine. I should have learned everything that I need in order to get these to fit. This is a good example of what we learned before when our content falls out of our elements. It's totally fine because we're going to realize that and go back and fix it. But for now, we're thinking ahead and adding this content in because I know it's already there. All right, let's go ahead and add some content into our H2s and our H3s and our H1 even. Sorry, let me turn my phone down. So my H1 is a lot of times the same as my title, so I'm going to do desert landscapes. Not always though, of course. And I'll just start to make something up for the H2s and H3s. So you could use the lorem ipsum for these as well. You don't need to take the time to make these up if you don't want to. All right, so then I have 3 articles. I'm going to do and I'm going to be lazy and go ahead and add in those 3 from H3s as well. All right, before we move on, let's go ahead and fix what's happening here. So now that I have content, I can go and start to change some of my height properties to auto. So let's go back to style, and we'll start with the smallest that we have so far, which is section. So here for section, I'm going to go ahead and add in a height of auto. Those sections need to fit inside main. So height for main, auto. And if I look back for now, I'm good. I may need to, again, change different things to auto, but for now it's fitting in there, so we can go ahead and move on. Let's next go back to our borders and begin to add some in. So we had dotted borders at the bottom of our H2s. So let's, in case anybody's a little bit mixed up right now, let me go ahead and pull up our example. So this is what I mean right here. This H2, I can see it has a border at the bottom. I don't have an H2 yet. So H2, border, but I need to not just add border, I need it only on the bottom. So border dash bottom. And the reason I'm having you do these 3 different kinds of borders is just as a reminder of the many different ways that you can add borders and how the code can be clean when you're doing so. So border dash bottom, I want this to be, I'm going to do 1 pix again, space. This is dotted, and I'll add in another color from my theme. So I'm going to bounce back over to my color. I'm going to go with this darker brown and paste that in. If this blue is covering it, don't let that trick you. You didn't add blue, it's just dependent on where your cursor is placed. So if I go back to my CSS and I move my cursor to where it is not on anything, the blue will disappear. That is a way that it's trying to help you know what you're coding. So for example, if I put my cursor on my H2, it highlights my H2. If I put it on my section, it highlights each section. Then we need on our H3s, so I'm going to go ahead and add border dash top. And I want it thick, so maybe 5 pixels. This is solid. And add in my color. And that's not even very thick, so maybe 15 pixels. There we go. I also want that same on the bottom, so I'm actually going to just copy this, paste it, and change top to bottom. Okay, we have all of our borders that we need, and if we want to see that in the preview, I just move my cursor. So let's start to fit things in now. So in our example, my H1 inside that header, I'm just going to go ahead and leave that for now since I don't need to manipulate anything. So once again, let's think global. So I can see here that the header, the main, and the footer are 100% of their parent element, which is the body. However, if we look at the section is not 100% of its parent. It's quite a bit smaller. So let's go ahead and add a width to our sections and make them smaller than the main element. So here's my section. I'm going to add a width, and that looks about 80% of its parent. As long as you're close for this project, that's fine. As long as it's smaller and you understand how to make it smaller than its parent. So I went ahead and added that 80%. Let's check it, make sure it worked in our preview. I can see over here, great, I have that space. Now, still thinking globally, what's the next smallest element after section? That's article. So over here in our example, these 3 articles. So I'm setting the section, I'm setting the width for these, and I'm looking, and I can see I need them to fit within their section, which means I can't leave them each 100% of their parent, which is what they are by default. I need to make them small enough to fit next to each other, and leave them small enough that not only they fit next to each other, but they also have breathing room. So that's going to be either margin or padding, and we'll figure that out later. But I need to think about that. So, for example, take 100 divided by 3, that's around 33%. But I can't have it 33% because I also need some breathing room. So let's start out about 30% each. I can always go back and make it smaller or bigger if I need to. I do not have an article selector yet, so I'm going to go ahead and add that in. So add in our width of 30%. If we look at our preview, we now see the width, we now see that it's smaller, but they don't sit next to each other. That's where the display inline dash block property comes along. So let's go to our article. Don't forget this semicolon. That might be why a lot of people have a hard time with getting these articles to sit next to each other. If you just added in display property and never remember to put that in, then it won't be working. So I'm going to add in display. And by default, these are block level elements. So their display is already block. So I know that's not my choice. I want them to sit inline. So I have the choice of inline. However, I can't add a width and height to an inline element. If I change its display to inline, I then will mess up because I can't, it will just fit to its content. I can't actually tell it how wide to be. That means I need to choose something else, and we've already learned that the best option would be inline dash block. Now it is working. I had to have all that line up. I had to make sure my articles were small enough to sit next to each other, and I then needed to change the article display from block to inline dash block. All right, next. Let's go ahead and I'm just randomly saving that just to make sure it fits. Let's jump back and decide what to do next. So looking at our example, let's start to add our padding in everywhere. So I can start up here with my H1 and I can see the text has space before the edge of the element. So that lets you know I got to add padding there into that H1. So I'm going to go over here, find my H1 element, which I don't have one yet. It makes sense to add that in above it H2. So I'm going to add in H1. Give it some padding. This only has padding on the left. So I'm going to go ahead and just, oh, nope, I lied. It has padding on the left and probably top and bottom. So let's go ahead and add that in. So padding, I'm going to go ahead and do all 4 sides. And it's not a lot, so I'm just going to do maybe, let's do 20 pixels. And I'm choosing pixels here. I could do percentage. For what we're doing now, we could do either. Just keep in mind, again, the difference. Pixels is a fixed ratio, meaning if you pull the browser in and out or you move to a different device, it's going to still stay the same no matter what, so you might have issues. If you use a percentage, it can grow and shrink. So usually if you want it to be able to grow and shrink across, whatever device you're looking at or however big you pull your browser, then you'd want to use a percentage. Go ahead and add padding 20 pixels to my H1, and if I take a look, I can see that it is pulled off the edge. We also need to address the font color. So I can look here and I can see that the brown that I chose is too dark for the font that I chose. We haven't gotten into formatting or styling our text yet. So later we'll learn, right now I could just make that font white, but I'm sticking to what we've already learned. So instead, I'm just going to make the background color lighter. I'm just going to go ahead and make it a white. So for both my header and my footer, I'm going to change that background to white. And I could just use the keyword white. I'm using a shorthand hex value. So find my footer, here we go. With hex values, anytime the hex repeats, so for example, for white, it's 6 Fs, I can shorthand that into FFF. So I have done that to my header and footer, and now I can see my text better. Let's move on and add padding to our sections. So if I look at my example, so all of this is the content of the section. I don't yet need to think about each individual item. I'm thinking about the section itself. So over here in section, I want this on all 4 sides, so I'm going to add padding. And let's go ahead and use a percentage for this one so we can just see. I'm going to go ahead and do 2%. And I'll check out my preview, see if that's enough. That looks pretty good. If it didn't, just go back and try a different percentage. And then we'll move in. I can see that in my example, I have space between each article. So you got to think through that. I just did padding inside the section to give space around all of that content. But when I'm thinking of something like this, I want space between these articles, not inside the article, but between them. So that is not padding, that is margin. I could go in and manipulate the padding and get it to look like my example, but then I wouldn't be using proper code. I need to use them for what they are actually used for. A reason beyond just that it's proper code is that if I did add, let's say, a background color to my articles, I then would notice a difference. Then maybe I would want to add padding so that the text didn't go right up to the edge of that color, and instead I have room inside that element. Where I'm not using a background color, I don't need to really add padding after. I could, but I can do what I want to do here with just margin. So if I think about how these are set up, I am adding a margin to the right side of each article. So I can go here to my article selector, and since it's an element selector, it's going to do it to all of them, of course. And I can add a margin dash right, and let's do 2%. Take a look at our preview. And I can see I now have space, but not as much as I do in my example. So I'm going to go back here and just make it bigger. So my articles, maybe we'll do 5% instead. Notice what just happened in my preview. It's too much now. The articles are now too big to fit within the section. That means I just need to back off a little bit. So 5% margin on the right of each of those made them too big to fit together inside section. So let's go 4%, still too big. 3%, it's small enough. If I want even more space, I could start to go even with decimals. So 3.5, too big. 3.2, too big. So maybe we are at 3.1 is big enough. I probably would just stick with 3% since it, 0.1% is not going to be that much of a difference. So yeah, I'm just going to go to 3%. Next, let's bounce back over and take a look. So next we have space between this section and that section. So same thing as I just did with the articles, except now the space is at the bottom. And actually, if I look, there's space at the top and the bottom as well of each of them. So let's bounce back over here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up my preview so we can see this happen while I do it. Okay, yeah, so looking here, there's no space here. I want to add space. There's no space here. And actually, I want to add space here. So I know I can go ahead and just add it on all four sides. So those are my sections. I find my section. I already added padding inside of it. And that gave me the breathing room around all the content inside of it. But now I want to push them away from each other. That's outside the element. So that is now margin. And I'll do a margin of, let's do 2%. All right. This brings up a great point as well. Notice I did that, but I have space here, not here. So let's mess around with a couple things. So this gray is my main content area. So maybe instead of adding margin, let's back that off. Let's go ahead and take that margin away from our sections. I'm going to add a little bit of margin back in, but first I'm going to take that away. And instead, I'm going to add padding to my main. The reason I'm doing that is the sections are the content or are the children of main. And if I add padding around them, I add space inside that main. So let's take a look and see how that looks. Maybe that's more what we're going for. So padding inside the main of 2%. So that is now getting me closer to the space that I see inside that example. But notice, and this is hard, sometimes beginners really forget this. If I look over at the side, I now see that my main no longer lines up with my header and footer. That is because we have over as main, we have our width at 100%. That we have set the size of our element at 100%. But remember that adding padding and border adds to the overall size of our element. So I can go back and address that now width, instead of 100%, I can just set it to auto. It allows it to fill its parent, but it will keep track of the padding and the border and make sure it stays inside of its parent. So if I look over here, it now is lined back up. But that did not give me space between the sections. So now I am going to go back into section, but instead of adding margins around all sides, I only need to add margin to the bottom. So margin dash bottom, and I'll do 2% to match what I was doing before. Let me move my cursor so we can take a look, and now we have that spacing very similar to what it shows in the example. All right, let's bounce back over and just make sure that we are getting everything that we need. I think, yeah, there's content inside the footer. So we have a paragraph that's inside the footer element. So I'm going to go back over to my index, go down to my footer, and I'm just going to add in just what it says there. So this is a paragraph, or let's do copyright. Oh my gosh, sorry, I can't type right now. Take a look at our preview now that we've added that content in. And I can see there it is, but it needs some padding. So go to my CSS, to my footer, okay, and I've added 2%. Sorry, I'm trying to look over this at the same time. So I've added in 2%, but that doesn't look like my example. 2% is what I did here. And I actually like that better than the example, but I did it on purpose so that you're seeing the differences. So this lines up with this. That means those two values need to be the same. So if I go look and see on my H1 what I have 20 pixels, I don't have a percentage. If I want them to line up, they need to be the same. So I'm going to go back here to my footer padding and add 20 pixels instead of, oh, not 200, instead of 2%. Take a look at my preview. Now that copyright text does line up. All right, let's just check one last time, make sure we got everything. I do have more sentences inside the H3. Doesn't matter, that's fine. Then I'll go back and check the rest of my assignment description. Make sure that I did everything. Important, this is saying just what I've already covered in the video. You don't have to use exactly the same colors and content that I did in the examples. Just make sure that whatever we're learning, the box model, looks the same. So we've tried to add the spacing the same way and all of that. I let you know that pay attention to the text content and what it says. It was giving you clues and how to nest the elements inside of each other. Also that the text content doesn't have to be the same. Sometimes the width or height for some selectors will be set to a percentage, a fixed unit of measurement, or sometimes even set to auto. You'll need to change the display property on one of the selectors, the articles, and everything you need to do to recreate this example has been taught at some point in the course, if not in the very week. So keep that in mind. I think that's what a lot of people had trouble with, is forgetting that you may need to look back into other videos or other written lessons. So, whatever it is that you're having an issue with, you might need to actually go back and take a look at it. So our deliverables, we already named our project folder correctly. We named our index and our CSS correctly, but this is a reminder. So if you need to double check and make sure that you did. Once we have everything ready, we want to zip and compress it and turn in only that zipped file on D2L. So it looks like at this point, we're pretty good to go. If you do need a reminder of submitting those projects, we've covered that. So you'll want to go back and go ahead and take a look at it.